What's going on, YouTube? I'm Zach Kramer with Progressive Payment Solutions. Welcome to the PPS vlog. Today, we're going to discuss something very important. We're going to go over how credit card processing works. By the end of this video, you'll be able to understand how the transaction works all the way from the beginning of when your client swipes their card, all the way to the end from when you get your money in your account, all the parties involved in a credit card transaction, and why, most importantly, why it's important for you to understand that. Let's begin. To start this off, we're going to talk about the general definition of what credit card processing is. And that's very simple. It's the transferring of funds from one bank account to another in an approved and authorized way. Now, that's a very basic definition, but we need to understand that before we look at who's actually involved in the credit card transaction. So let's begin that. The first person involved in the credit card transaction is going to be the person with the debit or credit card ready to make that purchase. Next, you have the actual merchant themselves, the business selling the goods or services, who's going to do it either with a credit card terminal, a POS system, or a gateway. They are going to be the ones actually charging the customer for the sale. Then you have the issuing bank. That is the cardholder's bank that contains the funds that the cardholder is going to use to pay for the merchandise. Then you have the merchant's bank. That is going to be the bank where the merchants store their funds, where the cardholder's payment gets sent to. Then you have the card association. These support credit card processing by acting as an intermediary between the issuing and merchant's bank via their networks, guidelines, and services. You can think of Visa, MasterCard, Discover, or American Express. You can identify these key players that way. Lastly, you have the payment processor. That's the company that transmits the information between the merchant, the issuing bank, the merchant bank, and the card association and their networks, among other things. So now you know how many parties are involved, and it's a lot. So let's do an example and figure out exactly how this all gets put together. Now let's go over how this is actually going to work. The first part's very basic. Your customer is going to insert, they can swipe, or they can tap to pay. Very easy. So once that happens, this is actually what's going on the back end. The terminal is going to send out a request for a payment authorization through the payment processor. Then the payment processor sends a signal to the card association from the person that paid to move the funds. It's going to include details like the card number, expiration date, CVV, all that good stuff. Then the bank will either approve the transaction or decline the transaction based on the funds in the person's bank account, whether or not they have credit or if they're using a debit card, if the funds are actually there or not. That approval of payment from the bank will then get sent to the card association that the merchant's bank has. Now, your client can go home within just a few seconds thanks to the credit card transaction being successfully authorized. That does not mean that you as the business have the funds in your account. You then need to settle the transaction to receive those funds. Even though the payment was authorized, it still has not been processed. The merchant has to wait until later in the day for the payment processor to actually process the transactions. This is called a batch. A batch is a group of transactions that are done throughout the day. Now, the processor sends these details to the card association, who will then debit the customer's bank account for the amount that they owe for the goods or services that were sold. Lastly, the customer's bank sends the funds to the merchant's bank, which they will then receive the following day or within 48 hours. It depends on your setup. Now that you understand all the parties involved in a credit card transaction and how it works, let's talk about why it's important to know this. This system is important to know because it's the processor that's responsible for creating the rates that you're going to pay. Now, due to contrary belief, the processor actually makes the smallest amount of money in a credit card transaction. The majority of it goes to the issuing bank. However, the processor is responsible for the variable that you're going to be paying. Everybody pays the same rate. There's a base rate, and then there's what's charged on top. That's all done by the processor. So you, as the merchant, need to be very informed on which processor you're going to choose. Not all processors are created equal. If you're interested in more information, we have a guide on our website that goes into depth on how pricing works and how you can choose the correct credit card processor and what to look for. Thank you for watching. See you next week.